Hi guys, and welcome to the War Story podcast. Great to have you back, or if you're a first-time listener, then welcome. We're glad to have you with us. A bit about what we do here at the podcast. We have a few different formats. We have Veteran State of Mind, where we talk about people's lives after the service, and War Story, where we talk about operations. Today's episode really kind of straddled both of those. So we're going to go ahead and call it a War Story podcast. Really it can fall in either camp. Our guest is a fantastic guest. He's served on Operation Banner, which was Northern Ireland, served in Bosnia, worked all over the place in private security, and he has done incredible amounts of fundraising, which has deservedly led to him being awarded an MBE. Really cracking bloke. His name is Wayne Ingram, and I think you're going to really enjoy today's episode. I felt inspired from it. I'm sure you will do too. All that we ask, guys, is if you enjoy the episode, if you find value in it, which I'm sure you will, please share it. Please go and give Wayne a follow. Maybe give him a few quid to whatever he's working on now, because he's always fundraising. Right now it's for scoliosis, which we'll talk a bit more about it. Didn't know much about it myself. Learned some on the podcast. So, yeah, if you enjoy it, guys, please get involved. Share it. Support it. Support our guests as well as the pod. All right, guys, without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Wayne Ingram M.B.E. We have so many directions that we could go with today's podcast. We've been living and continue to live a life of service, and a very full one. So let's just start with the one place where we can see maybe a clear line to begin this, which is in what drew you towards the military in the first place. Can you tell us a bit about your childhood and when you first got that army bug?
So I think I knew from about the age of five or six, mate. I used to march around the house and salute parents and things like that, get set around the ear. But it was really weird because my old man was a fireman in London from the early 70s. So he thought I was going to, because we were living in London at the time, South London. He thought I was going to go down that route. My grandfather one was in the RAF in Lancaster's, and the other one was the Royal Navy. And all my other uncles, like that side of life, were all bloody Royal Marines. So to go down the green route was difficult. But do you know what? Different. But I knew from the age of about 6 that that's what I wanted to do.
Why was that, do you think?
I really don't know. There was no guidance. There was no, pushing for me to join it. From the age of, I think, 12, 13, I went straight into the Army Cadets. Loved it. Spent all my time, every Thursday afternoon and on camps, going away with them. So when I came to leaving school, I mean, literally, if you'd said to me at the age of 10 or 11, right, you can leave school now and join the army, I would have done. I was just, that was what I was going to be destined to do. And I never swayed away from it. I mean, I still amazing jobs as well. I left school at 15, and the headmaster grabbed hold of me. And it was a guy called Mr. Akers, and I wish I could meet him now just to show him how my life has gone. Because at the time he said to me, you are never going to make anything of your life. I suggest you leave school and don't come back. I went to an all-boys school. It was still corporal punishment. We used to get the cane quite a lot, and so that was his that was his words on the Friday afternoon. On the Monday morning, I went to start working for the Hansards in the Houses of Parliament. So the Hansards are the speeches that they print, so they could have, say, 500, 600 speeches in there, and then our job was to remove speeches which were no longer going to go into Parliament. And then we'd stick them down onto, this is, you're talking the 80s, stick them down onto wax paper, then photocopy them again. And then once the booklet was done, this cheeky 15-year-old would wheel a box over to 10 Down Street and then take the rest over to House of Parliament. I used to have a cup of coffee with the chief librarian. He was a TA officer at the time, and I thought he was God. So it lasted for about 6 months, man, and the money was stupid. And they said to me, look, do you want a full-time job? And I was like, no, I'm going to join the army. So I think when I left, my old man got me a job in recruitment for the fire brigade over in Lambeth, and with a guy called two station officers called Gary Sheen and Dick Beattie, brilliant blokes, and they kept on saying to me, "Look, stay with us, stay do recruitment until you're 18, 19, and then join the army, join the brigade." But mate, that was it. So I literally just turned 17 and then started my basic training up in Catterick.
What was your kind of experience like of going into recruiting officers? I mean, this is the 80s, so I doubt there was any of this. You weren't getting adverts popping up on your social media and things like that. So how did one go about joining the army in the 80s?
I went to Norwood Recruitment, and literally just went in there one day and said, "Look, I want to join the army." And the recruitment sergeant at the time was a guard sergeant. And he was like, "Yes, you'd be ideal in the guards." And I was like, "I want to go to tanks." And just then, lucky enough, one another sergeant came through, "Right, come with me." So at that stage, you sat their little aptitude test online, right on their computer. I think that was written computer. It wasn't a computer at the time. It was a written paper. Did that, and he said, "Yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine for the army." And I think, memory's old, mate. I'm an old boy now, but I think I went to Sutton Coldfield for a weekend of aptitude tests and fitness, and then they said, "Yeah, you can join." So it was quite a fast thing from just over a year, I think, from going in there to actually getting through the basic training. But basic training was weird because I started on the 8th of December up in Catterick, and of course, that's the Armoured Corps at the time. Their basic training was 8 weeks, and then you'd followed by your trade training straight after that. So for the first 8 weeks, you didn't go home. But because it was the 8th of December, they finished for Christmas. So after 2 weeks, they sent us home. So I got on this train going down to down to London. I remember getting my lightweights and jumper, putting my berry on, which was huge. I hadn't shaded it properly. Walking through London, I was the bee's knees. But at the time, of course, it was a hotbed for IRA activity, so we were told no uniforms. But I couldn't care, mate. I was proud as punch in the army.
That's a good point to bring up, actually, mate. When you joined the army, what were your expectations of operations? Where did you expect to go? What do you expect to kind of experience?
So I knew I was going to go to Germany because at that stage, most of the British Army was in the was a BOR, British Army on the right. I knew I was going to go there. I was hoping I was going to go to Ireland at some point, but it wasn't. It was never guaranteed because predominantly that was your infantry battalions who were there doing all the infantry stuff. But we spent a lot of time. Excuse me. We spent a lot of time in Germany waiting for the Russians to come across the border. I mean, that on its own was a nightmare because it was at the time it was Deutschmarks, so it was 3 Deutschmarks to the pound, and I think a beer cost 70 pfennig, so less than 30p. So of course, and at that time, mate, it's completely different. So back in the 80s, at lunchtime, you could leave the tank park, go have your lunch, and then go in the squadron bar. The squadron bar be open. So as a 17-year-old, you could down a couple of pints, go back to work in the afternoon and working on tanks or driving tanks around. It was late, but you'd often get crushed out 2-3 o'clock in the morning to go and sit on the border for an exercise or something like that. But so a lot of time was spent there. But the only other conflict there was Northern Ireland.
So what was it? The actual you're in the Royal Armoured Corps, but what was the regiment that you were with?
So I started in the second Royal Tank Regiment, which was great. It was a real lovely London regiment, and the guys were fantastic. The regiment is it's an amazing regiment, and it's still around now, thankfully. And I went straight from there into tank gunnery, so I became this tank gunner. Now, when you're sat behind a chieftain or a challenger, firing their 120mm gun. It's brilliant. You're seeing things going bang, seeing targets explode and so forth. However, the reality is that when you get to the regiment, most of the time you're just servicing the guns or servicing the vehicle. You're not doing much. And then when you go on exercise, where I was to be this proper soldier, you'd go off and go and sit in wood somewhere in Semi-Arga for 4 or 5 days at a time, not even moving. And then all of a sudden they'd say, right, okay, we're going to go and do a squadron attack. The tanks would go out, do this squadron attack, and then go back to another wood and sit there for another 5 or 6 days. So in reality, it was really boring. And then in 1988, I was asked if I wanted to go and do the French Commando course. I went, yeah, well, I'll have some of that. So I went down to Brizac down in southern Germany on the French border, and did the Commando course, and absolutely loved it. For me, that was proper soldiering. I should have been an infantry, to be honest. If I'm truthful, I loved that. The back of my back was fighting all the webbing, rifle, helmet, and going for it, and that's what they were doing on this course. So I came back from there with this new eagerness inside me to go back to sitting on tanks in woods, and I found it really boring. But then in 1990, a tour come up with at the time the Royal Tank Regiment was split to 4 regiments. It was 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, of different parts of the country, and 3 RTR, which were your West Country guys, Cornwall, around that area. They were going off to South Armagh, and they were asking for volunteers. So I said, yeah, I'll volunteer to go and do that. And again, that was fantastic, because that was proper soldiering. That was your proper infantry stuff. Going out into the cuts for a couple of days at a time. You burden with your back and doing OPs and stuff like that, or slap VCPs. So for me, that was it. That was really, from there is where my direction changed within the army.
Can you tell us more about South Armagh then, mate, at the end of the 80s and your operation, your deployment there?
So I was lucky. I went to Ireland 3 times. I did a tour in South Armagh on the border, and then we did a tour in Belfast. Now those 2 were completely different. So South Armagh, there was the high threat of the sniper at the time. There was the 5.0 Barrett sniper go around and killing lads. But there were also bombs, covert bombs. And when these went off, they were massive. I mean, literally, I went out there. I think I was out there on the pre-advance. I've been out there about a week. And then as the main body were coming in, the RA detonated a covert bomb just outside of Armagh, which killed 3 IUC blokes, but also a nun from the local convent. So it was always big. And you could go out into the countryside, and you were looking for weapons all the time. But it was good. It was like I said to you, it was proper soldiering. Yeah, everything was by helicopter. So we were, the old head chopping, they used to call it. So they'd pick you up in a Lynx or a Puma, and then you'd be flying around the countryside, 30, 40, 50 foot off the ground, skimming over hedges, skimming over pylons, and then dropping back down. Or they'd shoot right up into the sky as high as they could to be aware from the surface of the air. It was really good. Yeah, really, really, really good. We had the tour I went on was in a place called Middletown. So it was a small farmhouse right on the border of South Armagh. Sorry, right on the border of Southern Ireland. I think the town was Monaghan. And what it was like I said to you, an old farmhouse that they put a massive corrugated iron fence around, and then they built some mortar hardened accommodation behind in the grounds of this farm. So the whole thing must have been about 150 square metres. And there was a couple of RUC guys in there permanently. And then there was the squadron in there. We had a top hanger. We'd overlook Middletown High Street and the border. And you'd have a sanger at the back. But it was always the constant threat of mortars. So we were always out doing mortar baseplate checks. or just crashed out because we thought that it was there were going to be mortars, which we thought was a pain in the arse really. But the squadron who took over from us, or the regiment who took over from us, I think they were the Royal Engineers. I'm sure they were. They got mortared literally a couple of weeks after we left because they left their base plate checks.
Can you just explain to people what base plate checks are, mate, who might not be familiar?
So the base plate is where the plate where the mortar goes on. It's an actual a bed of where they can fire the mortars from. Now, a mortar base plate is so that everybody thinks of the mortars as these big long tubes, and they've got this round base plate at the bottom. So the mortar sticks onto this base plate. It fires. They can pick it all up, strip it down, and take the two parts away. But the RA were really good, so they would fire. So what they would do, they'd get the old oxyacetylene cylinders, and they'd cut the tops of them off and make mortar tubes out of them, but then fix them into the backs of lorries. So they drive around, or cars. They've been known to take the roof off the car and put the mortar base plates inside them, fire, and then just either drive away or just leave the vehicle there. It'd end up burning. So that was what we were constantly doing. We were constantly looking for that threat. And again, what they used to do every now and then, they'd fire across the border because there was, they knew that you couldn't do anything about it. There was a massive river there between the north and the south. So they'd fire across, and it was up to the Irish police to try and sort it out. So you can do on that one.
When a unit would go on a deployment to Armagh or to Northern Ireland at that time, was there an expectation of casualties, or was it one of those where you think, we're all coming home? Like, what was it like for you as soldiers and for your families?
So for me, Northern Ireland completely messed me up. And I'll explain that in a minute, the reason why. Everybody thinks that they think, right, okay, well, you're a soldier. What are you moaning about? You're expected to go to war. But it was a different war. This war was being fought on the same streets, the same looking towns as it is back in the UK. So you jump on a plane. I mean, we went, like I said, we went from Germany, and then you'd come across into into Aldergrove Airport. You go down to your place, like I say, but everything looked the same. So the cars drove on the same side of the road. The red telephone boxes, red post boxes. People spoke the same language. All right, they sounded slightly different, but they spoke the same language. At the time for us, when we went out there, you have a thing called the beat up training. So you all get set. Your weapon handling skills go on, your patrolling skills. You do a thing called night out, which is Northern Ireland training. And then you go and spend some time in a place called Tin City. I think those Tin Cities now they were changed to represent Iraq and Afghanistan. But at the time, the Tin City was to represent the streets of Northern Ireland. So you go and spend a week there, getting contacted, blown up, and so forth. Different scenarios. So you'd have to work on that. But there was the high possibility that someone was going to get whacked out there, because the intelligence was saying exactly that. You'd have your NIREPs, your Northern Ireland reports. So prior to just going out, so literally the final few weeks, you'd be listening to the NIREPs, and they'd say an IUC officer was killed by a bomb here, or a soldier was shot on this checkpoint by a 5.0 sniper. So it was always in the back of your mind. So that was good. I mean, like I said, South Armagh was good, but Belfast was completely different. Belfast was nasty. So in South Armagh, I think I heard gunfire once. The very first night we got to Belfast, I heard a burst of AK from an area called New Lodge. It was just constant, literally constant every day. You'd hear devices going off. You'd hear car bombs going off. You could go to South Armagh, you could go to a farm, and you could speak to people, and they would be okay with it. You could tell they didn't want you there, but they weren't aggressive. They weren't overly aggressive. But if you went into an area called the Ardennes, where we patrolled, which is predominantly a Catholic area, which is a hotbed of IRA activity, mate, they just pure hatred. They'd be splitting. I mean, the crowd trouble was just terrible. I mean, you'd have a full-on battle line with shields and night-size petrol bombs being thrown at you. I mean, the worst thing which we found out there was the slates. So at night time, they'd get the slates from roofs and throw them at you like a frisbee. And you couldn't see them. So your visor was going down. And even if your visor was down, you'd still smack the back of the other side of your helmet. And your ears were ringing for hours afterwards. But just pure hatred. But like I said to you, that's when the things for me got worse, because on the 22nd of September, 93, so I went out to South Carolina 90 until January 91, and then I went back to Belfast the early part, I think June, July 93 until January 94. But that was a nasty tour. So on the 22nd of September, we don't have a lot of contacts anyway. But on the 22nd of September, I was given the patrol log. I was like, yeah, happy days. But I couldn't relax. I couldn't, so we call it 6 cents. I would try to go for a run around the camp, went to the gym. For some reason, I changed all of my first aid kit because I was a team medic at the time. Changed all my first aid kit that morning for a brand new first aid kit. And then that evening, I volunteered to go out on the patrol. And I was just stepping on to, it was just, people were just spitting, or not talking to you and just, but I went into a place called the Etna Drive. And as I got into the Etna Drive was completely empty, void of everybody. And there was another patrol coming the other way. It was a mate called Jamie. And the device went off from the bottom of his feet. It was a Mark 15 coffee jar. So a Mark 15 coffee jar is an improvised hand grenade. But you imagine that the large scale coffee jars, the glass coffee jars. So what they do, they put a kilo, 2 kilos of Semtex in there. I can't remember how much it is. Wrap it with nails, screws, debris, and so forth. A lot of it would have been wiped in human excrement. So, it caused contamination. And then what they would do, the detonator would be inside fridges where you open the fridge and the light comes on. Well, that switch would be the device for the detonator. So what they did, when they put it on, when they screw the lid down, it would arm the device. So when the device broke, the glass broke, the detonator plunger came out, would cause the ignition. And this landed at the base of Jamie's feet. So I literally wasn't too far away from him, sprinted. The car was the car next to him was totaled. There was flames coming out of that. But it was real. The first thing I saw was the whole of his clothes. His lower half of his clothes had been blown away and been ripped off. I was like, that's weird. There was an imprint of a 2p piece in his leg. I could actually see the Queen's face in his leg. His legs were in tatters, mate, blast injuries and so forth. So I put my hand over this hole in his right leg. He'd been burnt quite badly, so I used my water bottle over his leg. And I remember seeing there was this little old lady who was leant over a garden gate, just watching me, a couple of doors away. And I'd used all my water for the burns. And I said, like I said, he's everything been blown off. His boots been blown off. There was bits of his boots hanging out his legs, and so he's. And I said to the old woman, I said, "Can you get some water, please, so I can push his legs?" She went, "Fuck off! I hope he dies." I was like, and it literally it was like a smacking me between the eyes. So of course, he put the dressings on him. He got whipped off to Oak Hospital. But for a good week after that, I couldn't sleep. Probably I would see and smell the explosion. But in the early 90s, if you said anything, you were weak. You were unreliable. And I didn't want them to think that. So of course, I later learned I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2008, which I dare say we'll talk about later. But at that time, at the time of the event, the trap door in your brain gets closed. Unless you do it, that trap door gets closed. And all the other stuff, what happens after that, the trauma I was seeing in Bosnia, the mass graves and so forth, all the other stuff that happened in my life, then comes the amateur as a motorcycle paramedic, dealing with all the death and destruction there. Just got to a point where at the end, my brain just couldn't cope with it. But it's because there was no decompression. The lads used to come back from Iraq and Afghanistan and go potentially sometimes, most of the time, via Cyprus and have a couple of days decompression. But when I went out, even when I went out to Iraq, it's completely different. There's no similarity with the UK. It looks completely different. It smells completely different. The people are completely different. But literally a couple of days after I'd been with an explosion with Jake, I went home and went R&R. So I went from being in a place where I was constantly in body armour. We were getting contact every day, and we had 7 seriously injured on that tour. I was contacted every day, near on every day. You were constantly walking around scanning windows and so forth. To going home, stepping off the plane, going back to Dorset where I lived, expected to be this normal person. It's never going to happen.
What do you think of R&R as a concept? Like, because I think there's maybe 2 different ways of doing it, right? Like, if you've got, like, you say, your Second World War scenario where there's a very clear front, you're fighting an enemy on a front line, you're clearing trench lines, etc. That's one thing, right? And then you've got your counterinsurgencies, your Iraqs, your Northern Irelands. What do you think of the kind of the concept of R&R for soldiers on counterinsurgency operations?
So when I used to come home from Iraq, I never had any problems at all because it was completely different. Because I could step away I could get on that plane, knowing I'd left my weapon at home, and think to myself, no one's going to try and blow me up. No one's going to lob some Chinese rockets at me when I get home. So I could detach from that. But in Ireland, I couldn't. And a lot of the lads who I spoke to say it's that. I mean, I've got a mate of mine who I've known for years and years, and it's only last year, excuse me, that he says to me, he said how messed up he was. Mm. He said he didn't realise. He came back and he'd gone to a show with his daughter, and some music come on the show. He just started crying. I think now the whole idea of R&R is a good thing. But because you've got to see your family. I mean, again, at that stage, remember back in the 90s, and late 90s, really, we didn't have any means of communication apart from a 20-minute phone call,
right,
or blue letters. There was no mobile phones. There was no WhatsApps and stuff like that. So we never saw anybody for 6 months, unless you had that 2 weeks in between. So the idea of the RR is good. But for me, the island was a different. It caused all sorts of problems.
And was that on your second tour that incident happened?
Yeah. So the first one, I was fine. First one, there was some big ones. We had a couple of IEC guys get blown up, and a place called Tasta Road. We got sent out on ARF, which is air reaction force. So we picked up our helicopters, crashed out to this thing because the 2 guys were still in the car. We landed. They do the UDR, Ulster Defence Regiment at the time, the Irish, the Northern Irish Army around there. They set up this cordon. There was a guy called Steve Harrison, who was the squad leader. When we got there, he said, right, okay, go off into satellite patrol. So I was in this field satellite patrol with this team who I hadn't been with before. So just to make sure there was no more people around there firing and stuff like that. So lucky enough, Steve Harrison moved the cordon back another 100 metres. And then as we were in the field, so there's a mighty explosion happened, and they'd set up a second device to get the cordon troops. And it was exactly the same place where the guys had set up their first cordon. And lucky enough, for some reason, again, Gordon sits down. So he had this idea to move it back. So I came back from South America, mate. I was fine. I was buzzing. I'd broken my cherry where war was concerned. I wanted war. But then I went to Belfast, and it was every single day. You go on, you do your intelligence brief before you went out on patrol, and it's right. Okay, you can expect a long barrel shoot against you. You can expect a machine gun shoot against you. You can expect IEDs. I mean, so we went out one day, and a guy called Jules Fuller. He's now a colonel. He was my old troop leader. Really, really nice guy. But Jules was walking past. So I was satelliting. He was a multiple commander. So he was walking past this car, which had been backed up to this fence. And I think a guy called Scouse was his point man. Scouse looked, and all of a sudden the boot just buckled, and the car filled with smoke. He's like, what is that? So they called it in, and they put a load of Senteps in the boot of this car and detonated. So what they did, they put a command wire, run the command wire from the IED through to the house, and as the patrol went past, it was plugged into the plug socket. They just switched the switch to cause a circuit. But thankfully, for some reason, it didn't go off. Otherwise, it would have taken out the whole of the multiple. Mm. But the another thing was, literally in the garden next door was a little baby in the pram. So they would have killed the kiddie as well. And so we set up Cauldron. ATO came with Felix, the bomb disposal lad, and his vehicle came down, diffused the device, and then of course the hassle started, and they were just firing bricks, bottles, petrol bombs at us, spitting at us. It was constant every single day.
What were the contacts like? Is it usually like a single round burst of fire, or could they be quite prolonged?
Yeah, so it was literally just no. There was no firefights, mate. Like you guys had in Iraq and Afghanistan, nothing like that at all. But I think that was very, very rare. I never saw anything like that. If it was a shoot, it was a single round, and again, you'd never know where the firing point was. Mm. So you'd be going into depth. You go towards these places where you think it is. A lot of the time was that's wrong actually. There was one time. So the CO's Rover group was coming into the Ardoyne from the Shankill, the Shamrock Club. There was an Irish club there called an Irish bar called the Shamrock Club. So his Rover group was coming down that way, and my road at the drive. I was with the RUC, and we were driving along at the drive. Also, we heard a burst of about 3 or 4 bursts of AK-47, and then followed by a big explosion. Shit! So the steer was towards there, so we come flying down the road towards there, and the CO's Rover group had been engaged by a guy with a AK-47 and then a vulnerable prig. A prig is it's like an improvised RPG. So it's a shot over the shoulder firing device that fires a rocket at the thing. So the rounds from the AK-47 were hitting the Rover group. A guy called Andy Dines jumped out under fire. They stopped firing. He ran around the back of the house to cut off the gunman because he knew where the gunman was. Just as the gunman was climbing over the wall with his AK in his hand, so Andy arrested him. And the bloke got sent down for years. He was obviously released on the Good Friday Agreement. But Andy was ordered military cross for that, purely because he acted under sustained fire. But the prig had gone off and detonated against thankfully missed the road group, and hit the wall. But again, that night, we were there all night because I had to carry out investigations, and it just, random bomb came out, big lumps of wood, petrol bombs, all sorts being thrown at you.
So, I think this kind of brings in the rules of engagement. What rules of engagement were you operating under, and what did you think of them?
So our hands were really tight. If you fired your weapon, you were automatically guilty of something. It was under this white card. You used to carry this white card, and you could It was something stupid like, you could see someone about to throw a coffee jar at you, and you weren't allowed to, or you could shout a warning. However, if they'd thrown the coffee jar, you wouldn't have been allowed to engage them because they'd already done their threat. It was all stuff like that, mate. It was just, your hands were really tight.
Sorry, I just want to make sure people understand here as well. By coffee jar, you mean improvised IED, right?
Yeah, there's plenty. Yeah,
just in case anyone's not following that.
Yeah, they're not going to throw Nescafe. You go, wait tonight. Yes, I know it was the coffee jar, which was, as we talked about earlier, the one which seriously injured Jake was the one which was filled with explosive. It was an improvised hand grenade, but you would always, it was always in the back of your mind to do it. I mean, of course you would. If you saw a gunman, you would issue a warning, and then you would open fire. But there was no two-way exchange of gunfire like you guys saw. It was never like that. Never.
Did you what was the feeling of the troops towards these rules of engagement?
Yeah, we all knew that our hands were tied. Yeah, we all knew our hands were tied. But again, we are a professional army. So we worked to that. There's so we had a guy. I said I went to Ireland 3 times. I had to go back for a court case because one of our guys attempted to kill one of the IRA terrorists. So we had a thing called the Frizzell's fish shop, which exploded while I was out there in Shankill. We had 2 areas which we patrolled. The Shankill, which was Protestant, and again, you'd walk down the road and there'd be red, white and blue curbstones, people offering you cups of tea, biscuits, smiling at you, talking to you and so forth. And then you step across the crumbling road into the Ardine, and again, it was completely different. That was your Catholic areas where it was taught to RA. 2 guys, Thomas Begley was one of them. He was an IRA terrorist from the Ardine. Came down and was with one other. I cannot remember his name, but they put this device in Frizzell's fish shop, and what they were going to do was pull the Darling pin out to arm it and give a warning, because apparently up above it was one of the UDR, UVF. I don't know. I think it was a Protestant paramilitary group. Apparently had their building above this Frizzell's fish shop. But when they moved the Dowling rod out, the device detonated, killed 11 people. A woman who was pregnant, a little girl, and so forth. And we were just going out on the camp when this device went off, and we were told to come back in. So a couple of days later, Begley was being buried up at the top of the road in the Holy Trinity Church. But the guys were doing a mobile patrol. You got the old snatch vehicles. Again, I think you guys using that in Iraq. There's no way they should be in Iraq, but they're out there. And these are the ones where you see the soldiers during the troubles standing out on top of them. So they'd be doing that. And one of the guys, we didn't realise was just had really bad mental health issues. And this terrorist called Eddie Copeland there was an exchange of words between the 2 of them. And this guy ended up shooting Eddie Copeland several times. Yeah. So he got sent down to prison. So I had to go back for his court case for when he actually got sent down from prison for that. And that was the only time that I've known soldiers, that I've personally known soldiers, abuse the system.
So in that situation, then, this Copeland was a known terrorist.
Yeah,
and he's able to stand on the road and have an exchange of words with a British soldier.
Yeah. We knew them. So you'd have this thing called the montage board. So prior to going out, you'd have the players' faces. So you'd have pictures of people on this board, and you were to look out for them. And it'd say, okay, he's wants to be arrested. He's on the run. Just keep an eye out for him. But you know who these people were. You knew they were members of the IRA, but you couldn't do anything. We knew where they lived, but we couldn't do anything. So you were walking past, and you'd see them. You'd stop them. You would try and question them. We would answer your questions. There'd be a lot of grease there, and then you go back and you'd report it to the intelligence. Okay, I saw such and such outside the Shamrock Club, or I saw him on the Havanas, or I saw him at the Drive. These are all areas in the Ardoi. So you knew who these players were, but again, it was the other side. Again, you could also know who the players were for the Protestant sides. So you knew who these people were, but you couldn't do anything about it.
And that was down to...
No, sorry, mate.
I was just saying, like, what? Because I think a lot of people might have a really hard time. I mean, I know I do, like, wrapping their head around, someone's a player, and there he is, and you can't. So I'm imagining this is because there's a lot of legal stuff involved. He's a British citizen. You can't just arrest a British citizen. Is that the kind of...
Yeah, it's just, you knew they were members of the RA, or UVF or Red Hand Commandos, whatever they were. But you couldn't just go up to them and say to them, right, okay, because they would deny that they were a member of the RA. You knew they were, and it's proven it. But if they haven't done anything wrong that they can get arrested for, then there's nothing you can do. Every now and then you would search their houses, or you'd search associates' houses for weapons or something. Like I said, after Jamie was whacked, there was a house search went in. Some intelligence was gathered somewhere. I dare say an informant said something, and they did a house search in the Ardoi and found a couple of rifles and some pipe bombs, which were bombs, which were again just little bombs to explode. And these rifles were linked to several killings throughout the province. And again, but they were found in the coal shed of this house. So these people were arrested. I didn't know anything about it. Yeah, you'd have to release them. But you know what? So the older I get, I used to hate. It was a hatred, and I feel embarrassed to say that because I'm the professional soldier. You shouldn't have hatred. You should have a professional outlook at life. Well, I used to hate certain people in there. But you know what? And the older I get, you think to yourself, to stop people in the street. You imagine like the Irish Army coming over here. You and your wife, girlfriend walking down the street with your baby, and you'd stop them. Right? Okay. Yeah. Let me search you. Spread your arms and legs, and you pat them down. You get her to lift the baby out of the pram and so forth. You imagine that? You can understand why these people had so much hatred inside them. And you have to remember that a lot of the people they joined because their family member had been killed or something, either by the British Army or such and such. So it was a long hatred there.
Yeah, mate. I generally think in most conflicts, if you just took these two people into a totally different situation, they'd probably sit down and have a pint and get on fine.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. But so that was it. And like I said, I did a few tours in Bosnia, which again was completely different, and that was fine for me. There were certain things I saw there which were, it was a horrible war, Bosnia. With digging up mass graves and stuff like that, and you think to yourself, it was just across. It weren't too far away on a flight, and in the 90s, it reminiscent to what was happening during the Second World War with concentration camps and stuff like that. And how did we let it happen? and we let all these atrocities happen. That was okay, but unfortunately for me, the seed had been set for a mental health episode. So I did that, but unfortunately,
before we move on, sorry, mate.
Yeah, sorry, mate.
Sorry, mate. I don't think we've ever had anyone really talk about Bosnia before on the podcast. So I'd love to dig down a bit more into that, if you don't mind.
So Bosnia. I mean, there was the lads for the regiments. Going back to Belfast in '93, I was attached to the 9th 12th Royal Lancers, which was a formation reconnaissance. So brilliant. Yeah, up to 150 kilometres forward of the of the British Army, doing proper infantry type stuff. And they said to me, "Look, do you want to transfer to us?" So I snapped at the chance and spent the rest of my career with the 9th 12th. So in '93, the 9th 12th were the Cheshires were the first ones to go out to Bosnia, and those guys, when they came back, they were different. They seemed some terrible stuff. But I think 96, 97 was when the war, it went from being UNPROFOR, which was United Nations, to SFOR, which was a stabilisation force. So overnight, your vehicles were painted went from being painted white to green and black, and you went from being a blueberry to your own berries again. And it was just to make sure that the area was safe. These post-war factions were not fine. There was still a little sporadic fighting, but it was not. So we did that in 90. So 97 was the first time I went out there, and again, it was just literally the war just finished. So there was just carnage everywhere. We got sent down to an area. So you'd have things like you'd go on patrols in your vehicles. You'd have to go to a troop house. So a troop house was a building that they'd managed to acquire way deep in Bosnia, somewhere in your area. And as a troop, you'd stay there. So you could go and patrol from there, or you'd be dispatched from there to go and deal with any troubles anywhere. Foot patrols, helicopter patrols. It was all good stuff. And I think at that stage they were looking at catching the war criminals. So all the guys had been proven to be bad people during the war. It was down to catching them. Now the route of catching them was all down to the SF. Now the SS and the SBS and that lot, they were all going off and doing their stuff and catching them. We would be put in doing cordons. So, right. But one day we were tasked to go down to an area, little village called, I think it was called Blackeye. I'm not 100%, but it was right on the border. And apparently this old couple had been ethnically cleansed. So the village the opposing force had gone in and completely killed the village and got rid of the bodies into a mass grave. But we were told that this couple wanted to go back and spend their final days back in their village. So we had to go and give protection because they said that the other forces were going to come across and finish what we were doing. So we did that. The mine threat in that area was terrible. There was mines everywhere. So the EID went in and cleared this house that we were going to stay in. And the old couple were at the bottom of the garden in this shed. And that's all they had. And they had nothing. They had no clothing at all, just in a couple of little bags. And he used to eat greens. It's used to feed him greens most nights. So we'd go down there and give them rations and sugar and to vary their menu, and he'd give us greens. But in the base of this house were all old, crusty, bloody bandages. There were old bits of blood and so forth where they'd done their atrocities. It was shocking, mate. Then they come the times of finding mass graves and digging up mass graves, and again that's you can't believe it actually happened. So just for instance, say there was a mass grave found in Wales somewhere, right? So what they would do, they would cordon the area off. They'd map out the area with LiDAR or sonar, whatever they use, I don't know, to find where the bodies are underneath. And then they would proper teams would go in to excavate it and to get down to where the actual bodies were. There was no. So we arrived at this mass grave, this supposed mass grave where they thought this area was going to be, to get met by a couple of old boys with a big hollow steel pole, and next to him was this that's where they parked the digger. Young, like 18, 19-year-old engineer was in it, and so behind us was a road, and children were walking to school with satchels on their backs. Yeah, not even giving a second glance, because it was normality for them. And the old boys, what they do, they go and get this pole and then hammer it into the ground, and then they'd sniff the pole, and then lift it out, move it on, hammer it down again, sniff. And they did this until they both stopped, and they're both looking, nodding, and then they called the engineer over and started the shovel. Now, bodies are supposed to be 6 feet because it's supposed to stop the creatures going down, digging them up into bodies, disease and so forth. These were probably about 3 feet down, but they were all soldiers in body bags initially that we found. Some were like white figures. Literally just white faces, but they just looked like they were plastic. Others had massive trauma to their face where you'd seen they'd been wiped there, so that their cause of death. Others were just skeletons. It was weird, but the smell, and that's what these old boys were selling, was the actual smell associated with mass grave. And a couple of years later, I was on the beach with my boys. We were looking for crabs, and we went over. If you turn over a big stone and you get all the black sludge underneath, that's what a mass grave smells of. Just smells of dead and rotten material that you get at the beach. And I was like, oh, and they went, so you all right, Dad? And I said, yeah, I'm good. But that was literally like being hit by a shovel straight in the face. And that's what it was. But then what we found out afterwards is that the bodies, the soldiers, had been put over the village. So, and it was a final sort of like, kicking the ball, saying, right, okay, we will always be on top of you. Mm-hmm. There was like kids and civilians underneath. Weird. But then when I went back in 2003, it was completely different.
Completely different how, mate?
So it was 10 years after the war. I really didn't want to go back, mate. And I thought, this is a waste of time. I was a troop sergeant at the time, not far from being promoted to a staffy, and had a young troop leader. It was a guy called John Farrer, brilliant guy, one of the best troop leaders I've ever had. So he was the troop leader. I was a troop sergeant, and we were just told, right, okay, this is your area. Can you go and find weapons? So we'd go off and go do it. But because he was busy in learning stuff, and working in the HQ, it was down to me really. So we were going off. We were going off, mate, into the wilderness, speaking to local farmers, local landowners, saying, look, have you got any weapons you can? And you'd get the odd hunting rifle or a really rusty air rifle that would take back and say, look what we found. But I always wanted to speak to the chief of police in my area, Latasi. Bless him. And he really didn't want to speak to me. But then you have to think about, over the last 10 years, he's had every 6 months a different bloke coming up to him saying, I want to speak to you about weapons. I want to speak to you about this. So he's sick and tired of it. So he didn't want to speak to me. One day I turned up, and I turned up an hour early to make sure I got him. He saw me. He ran out the back. I chased off. Mate, I fell over. I tripped over the curb. And so as he's speaking out of the car park, I'm rolling in this dust ball on the ground, thinking, okay, I got away with this. But there was a couple of guys who I could hear was started laughing, and one turned out to be the Minister of Defence. I was okay, well, look, I've missed him, but I'll speak to him. So he invited me up for coffee. We had a coffee. And this is where my life changed. It showed me this picture of a little Bosnian boy called Stefan Savic, who had a severe facial deformity. So Stefan had been born with a facial cleft. He was 4 at the time. He was born with a facial cleft, and they hadn't done anything. So his eyes had grown further apart, and it was like a small mound for his nose. And it's like, can you try and help? Can the British Army try and help? We've got an operation. It can be planned in Paris, but that's going to cost about €30,000. And his father, there's no way he can afford it. The other guy in the room turned out to be Stefan's father. So they gave me this picture. He said, look, can you help? I said, look, I can't promise anything. I'll see what I can do. So I went back to camp and I spoke to James Farrar, who was the sworn leader. I said, look, I've seen this. I'd like to try and help raise money. And he said, well, we can't just do that. Not as a retirement. I need to get permission. So he had to go and speak to the colonel. Colonel had to go and speak to the brigadier. A couple of days later, it came down and said, "Yep, you can do it." But James said to me, "Look," he said, "just to let you know, be careful because it will be a gargantuan target." And I was like, "No, easy." 13 years later, mate, that's when it finished. So I set about trying to raise money for Stefan. I had to speak to I had to try and get the operation first. So I phoned up Great Ormond Street Hospital from Bosnia and spoke to the secretary. I said, "Look, this is who I am." They put me through to a guy called David Dunaway, who was a Harley Street craniofacial consultant. One of the nicest people you've ever met. He is like your father, grandfather, uncle, best friend, all rolled into one. He is the nicest gentleman you could ever meet. So first thing he wanted to do was find out about the infrastructure in Bosnia, the medical facilities. He wasn't concerned about himself or money, stuff like that. He was like, how's this doing? So we had to get a CT scan sent it over to him. And a couple of weeks later, he said, "Yeah, I think I can do this. But you have to, I have to see Stefan in person." So then I had to, get him back. Well, we started this fundraising event. So what I did, the first thing I did was I arranged a guy called Darryl Gibson, one of my corporals, said, "Let's have a football match." Everybody loves football. Well, I didn't because I play rugby. But I said, "Okay." So we had a football match. And what we did, we had the post-war factions on one team against the British Army. So all the lads who'd been fighting one another were now united for this cause. I raised €6,000. They put me in goal to stop on the penalties because, like I say, being an ex-rugby player, it was a really good day. We raised €6,000. Afterwards, the Minister of Defence said to me, "Is there anything else we can do to help you?" And I said, "Well, we're trying to get weapons." He said, "Leave it with me." So a couple of weekends later, he said, "Meet me here on the Saturday afternoon." He said, "And what we're going to do," he said, "we'll put the words around and we'll get people to, if they've got weapons, to donate and give them here." So the scene from Jaws where he says, "I'm going to need a bigger boat." So I'm rocked up in 2 Land Rovers, and I turned around to Rod Gibson, who's my troop corporal. "Shit, we're going to need a 4-tonner." Mate, it was sort of like 70 rifles, 30 hand grenades. It was anti-tank mines. It was 7 RPGs complete with warheads, thousands of boxes of ammunition, boxes and boxes of hand grenades, just in this car park. I was like, but you have to think, right? So the way I look at this is, these are the weapons that they wanted to hand in, but they're not going to hand everything in. So you think that was under our noses all the time, what is out there. Yeah. So I did that. Stefan came back. David Dunaway said, "Yeah, he could operate on him." So Stefan he came back in August that same year and had the first of 5 operations. So the first one was to remove his teeth to get his, because he had a massive craniofacial operation planned. So he had to remove his teeth, or a certain amount of his teeth, just to make sure he was able to operate. And then David did a 12-hour operation to deconstruct his face, deconstruct the bones, and then move it all back together to make sure that it looked normal. Mate, and he after this 12-hour operation, he changed completely. But, just before the operation, David came up to me and said, how much have you raised? And we'd raised about 80 grand at that stage. Because I was going home on our, if we talk about R&R, I was going home on R&R, and I was doing, I was rattling tins around the local football grounds. Asda were really good. Asda in Weymouth allowed me to put out tins outside at the bottom of each, with a picture of Stefan on it, on the bottom of each till. And people, whatever change they had, would just put the money in there. They allowed me to do a cooked barbecue. They supplied the barbecue, the food, the meat and so forth. So I cooked the barbecue outside and sold the burgers and buns and stuff like that. So the money was coming in, and then the local paper, and it went on to GMTV or whatever it was at the time, Raven Haynes, and I'm really talking, like I said, back in the early 2000s. And people were just donating money. The UK populace is really, really generous. So they just donate money all the time. But then David said to me, prior to operation, he said, look, I'll let you know now, you're going to have further operations. And I thought it was just one operation. But he said, you're going to need to do further operations to reconstruct the stuff that we do now as he grows older. I said, yeah, no problems at all. And he then said to me, he said, just to let you know as well, I'm not going to charge any of my services. So the whole of the 13 years, I had a Harley Street consultant professor, not once did he charge a single penny. Still had to pay for, because he was all done privately, still had to pay for flights, accommodation, all the other stuff, the hire of the hospital, the meds, the hire of the nurses and the anaesthetists and so forth, with all the other stuff, visas and so forth. So the money, it drained the money, knowing. But he saved me so much money.
Yeah, man, poor bloke.
Amazing.
So, had you ever done anything like this before, mate? Like fundraising stuff, or was this
No. So when I first started, I thought it was going to be a piece of piss. I wrote to a load of celebrities, expecting all the money to come back in. And out of all the celebrities I wrote to, I got one letter back from David Beckham, who said, "I'm really moved by your plight. However, at the start of each year, I nominate 4 charities that I'll raise money for or help with money." He says, and I've never stepped away from that. He says, so I can't help you at this stage, but if you need in future help, let me know. And that's what typical British Army fashion. I'm like, right, so do you like? We can do this. So it stuck it from there. And then from Stefan, so Stefan's operations took 13 years from start to finish for him to have his from first to his final operation. But it also enabled me to learn about fundraising, learn what you can do, how you do it, and so forth. So I've had a very successful fundraising portfolio, really. I went out to going back to the military. In 2004, I was medically discharged. I broke my leg in 2000, really, really badly. I broke it in 6 places. I had to have pins and plates put in, and it was never going to be fantastic. But I injured it again when I was in Bosnia in 2003, and then I knew I'd done something serious to it because it was black and blue. But being a true sergeant, all I kept on doing was just tighten my boot up and take copious amount of bloody bruising. And then I was jumping in the vehicle one day to service the little gun. And I whacked my ankle, and I knew at that stage it was just, gone. So I ended up going back to Shipboat, the first place I went to. and out into a field hospital, and they operated and removed the pins and plates. But again, it was a downhill slide for me then. I went to the UK, injured it again, so I ended up in Headley Court. Went home on Christmas leave from Headley Court and broke it again then. And they said to me, right, well, there's nothing we can do. Stay at home until it heals. And unbeknownst to me at that stage, I was kind of thinking wireless. And the wireless was I think they stopped it now. And the army should have stopped it. It was terrible. I just stayed at home and was waiting to hear. And all of a sudden I had this phone call saying, like, just let you know, your medical discharge has been approved. I went, what do you mean? I want to stay in the army. I was a staff sergeant at the time. Thought I was going to get WO2 and look at commissioning and so forth. And I did 18 years, and they kicked me out. And the day that I handed my stuff in, I went to Bovington, which is a training regiment at the time. And I went. When you go to the QM store, there was a line that said, "Do not step behind the." So I was leaning over the counter. And he went, and this bloke, civic, came in. He goes, "You behind the line?" I went, "Who the fuck do you think you're speaking to?" Mate, I'm Staff Sergeant Ingram. Come here to hand me kit. And he went, "Oh, story staff," said such and such. The bastard had the last words. He made me pay for my PT vests, which I hadn't had for 18 years because it wasn't my 1157. Went upstairs, went into RHQ, stood attention to this civvy who must have been about 18 years of age. I said, "Mate, there you go. I've got to turn my ID card in." He opened up the top drawer, took out a big pair of scissors and cut the ID card in half. I said, "Thanks, mate." And that was my army career finished. Mate, I walked out there crying. Literally got into the car park, started crying. So that was in the December. December. And lucky enough, I joined the ambulance service in the January the following year. I started as a technician, then a year later qualified as a paramedic, and then went on to the motorbikes. So I was seeing all the most serious jobs, as a motorcycle paramedic. They'd send us to it's all the category A, the most serious jobs. And of course, I didn't realise that the medical discharge had affected my mental health. I was crying at night time, literally copious drinking copious amounts of alcohol. And if you'd said to me then, leave the ambulance service and join back in the army, I would have done. But I was in the ambulance service again, doing all the worst case jobs. And it was having an effect on my mental health. So in 2009, they took the bikes off us for some reason, because they needed patient carrying capabilities to respond to jobs, and the bikes never got there because you could send a car, and theoretically you could turn around and say, "Oh, I could put a patient in the car," so the clock would stop. But if they sent a bike, the clock would still run until the patient carrying capability got there. So I went back on ambulances and was just then going to the mundane jobs, the full non-injuries and so forth. So I left the ambulance service and went out to Iraq as a close protection medic out there. Did that for...
Sorry, mate, just one before we go on. So just on this bike set, it sounds like they took a service that was actually a very useful one, but because it didn't fit well with the kind of, this is our reporting on times, they got rid of it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Because that's how it works. Is bums on seats and timings, and it's all statistics. They're not looking at that you've saved this life or you've saved that life. That's a bonus. But if you can save that life and also hit these statistics, then that's a great thing. There was no way they should have taken the bikes off us. Mate, they were brilliant. We was always getting, we were getting to jobs really, really quickly. And most of the time we've been the same jobs even as the helicopter. But the other side of that is that you were seeing some really horrible jobs. I started to attract the name shipman after Harold Schumann, because the amount of dead people I was going to. Because there's only certain things you can do to save someone, and if their body's too hurt or they've been down too long, you're not going to do it. So, example, I can give an example because it doesn't give any names and stuff. So I was sent to a place called Bridport. The ambulance had gone out, so they said, right, can you go to Bridport on standby just in case anything happens down there? So something had happened further up the county. So they then said to me, right, okay, we want you now to move up to Lyme Regis and hang around that area just in case. So I was right between the two. So I was there for about half an hour. All of a sudden I got sent to a cardiac arrest, a 13-year-old girl in cardiac arrest. This little girl had come home from school. She'd been a little sod. Her parents had taken, this was literally, so this was outside Lyme Regis, 10, 15 minutes away on a motorbike. This little girl had been sent home from school. She'd been a little sod, so the parents had taken her mobile phone off her. She said, right, that's it. And she got sent to her room. Right, that's it. So she said, I'm going to go and hang myself. She went upstairs, put this little rope around her neck to mimic that she was going to hang herself, tripped, and they hung herself. Parents found her 10 minutes later. So by the time I got there, she was already down for about 20 minutes with mum and dad doing CPR. So I'm doing basic life support on this little girl as the ambulance is taking another 10 minutes. And you can't replicate the guttural crying of parents knowing that their child is dead. And these were the sort of things which I was going to, which was compounding to the mental health. So then they sort of took the bite for first. So I saw this. So I went to Iraq as a close to some medic out there. Thoroughly enjoyed myself. It was rad. We were being attacked most of the days with mortars and 155 rockets and stuff like that. But that's why they were paying us pop star money. But then the contract dried up, and I had a telephone call, said, look, do you want to go to Africa on a gold mine? So I ended up going out there as an aeromedical paramedic on a gold mine, and ended up being the health and safety manager for exploration out there after that contract finished later on. But I went to an orphanage, and these little kiddies had nothing. So I ended up raising money to pay for this orphanage, to buy a new orphanage. And what I did, I got 24 people, local nationals and expats, to each cycle an hour apiece on the bikes in the gym. I was going to cycle between. This is how thick I am. I said, yeah, what I'll do, I'll cycle between the Waddyville and Knockshot, because it was a place called Royal Tank. And in the middle of the desert, maybe 45 degree, 50 degree heat for the Sahara Desert. There's silly bollocks here saying he's going to cycle it. Didn't have a bike, right? Didn't even think about any, right, who's going to be my backup, who's going to do this. And then I got called in the office and said, look, just to let you know, you can't, because you've now been named by Al-Qaeda as a kidnap target. I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's a fair point. So we ended up doing this 24-hour thing and raised enough money to help buy and build this, to help build this brand new orphanage for the kiddies. So that was another fundraising event under my belt. Yeah, it was good.
So, what about that family in the UK, mate? Are you married? Do you have kids? Like, when you're spending this time away, and if so, what was that like for you on the mental health side of things?
So my first wife left me when I was in the army. So I was married for 5 years to an amazing person called Tracy. But I was just a complete arse. I was just a army through and through. Yeah, I didn't care that I was leaving her to go on tours. She was always this lady who was going to be at home and look after the boys. I had 2 boys. And of course, I'd go away. You know what it's like. You go away and you're surrounded by your mates. So and you're in that bubble. So that bubble is all counsel at the time. So I had this amazing wife at home, who had enough. So she left me after 5 years. And then in 2006, she left me in 2006. I married Cara, who I met on our basic training for the ambulance service together. And we've been married ever since, come up to our 20-year point. It may sound a bit hypocritical because it's like going away because I still work away. I work away now as an offshore medic in the oil and gas. So I spend 4 weeks away and then come back for 4 weeks. So I used to go to Iraq 8 weeks out, come back for 4 weeks. Africa 6 weeks out, come back for 3 weeks. But the difference was, okay, the money was fantastic. The money was really, really good. But the difference is that I could FaceTime, I could WhatsApp and Skype them every single day if I wanted to. I wasn't going away, I wasn't seeing them. And we knew we were doing it for a better reason. And she was, initially we said, look, we'll do it for 5 years. And we did it for 5 years. We came back and I came back and I started working in the prison service as a paramedic manager in there. But again, I ended up going away like 4 or 5 days at a time. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well earn some decent money. So we've been married now 20 years. And it's good. The girls, we've got two daughters, Freya and Lily. They're really good. The whole family's excellent. Unfortunately, our daughter Freya was diagnosed with something called scoliosis in 2019. And scoliosis is a curvature of the spine. And what I'll do is I'll send you a picture of the day that we actually saw it. So where I was sat now is over like this breakfast bar. And she was leant over the breakfast bar eating a breakfast. I was unstacking the dishwasher. My wife was making the sandwiches. This was 2019. I said, come on, Squid, sit up, babe, it's going to hurt your back. And she sat up. I was like, oh. My wife lifted up her shirt, and the side would hit us. Mate, I could have cried. She had this massive curvature of her spine. But she was 12, going on 13. She used to bathe herself, just get herself dressed. There was no need to go near her while she was undressed because she could do all herself. And she was pain-free. So she didn't know she had this abnormality. And then it was measured at 74 degrees. Yeah. So the only thing that happened, was open to her was that she was surgery because her deformity was 74 degrees. So we went through all the different options and so forth. Now, cool. I felt a complete failure. How could I be a decent paramedic and miss that on my daughter? I must be a shit paramedic. But again, the truth is that we hear this so often with different parents. They don't know initially because they're all pain free. Towards the end, so she had the operation on the 6th of December, that in 2019, and she was in a lot of pain there. She had difficulty breathing. Her deformity had gone up to 96%. It was terrible. So she had this 6-hour operation to insert 2 titanium rods into her spine and just try and straighten her spine as much as possible. And it was the first time I could put myself in the shoes of Stefan's parents, Slava and Milos, because you get told that your daughter could get paralysed, she could die, and so forth. What's happened to my life? And they said, of course, they said that to them about Stefan. But thankfully, she had the operation, and the recovery is unbelievable. I will send you pictures, and please, if you want to, add it into this podcast so people can see and can relate to what we're talking about. So she was in Southampton with my wife. My wife stayed with her every single day, and I would commute from Dorset on Portland up to Southampton every single morning, and then drive back in the afternoon. Doing the washroom run and taking snacks and so forth. And then a week later, I walked into the ward to see Freya walking down the corridor with pulling her drip. She was amazing. But they promote movement, so she has to move up to the top floor into our room. It's like having a baby again. We had to give her pain relief every 3 hours, to help her with the pain and so forth. But I actually said to her there and then, when I was in hospital, I said, look, I'm going to help raise awareness of scoliosis. I'm going to do a fundraising event for this. That was in the December 2019. She went back to school in March 2020. She was back 2 weeks, and then we all got locked down because of COVID. So I couldn't do anything initially because I was all tied in with working on the COVID helicopter and working on the ambulance shifts and so forth with that. So in 2022 or 21, bloody memory's terrible. What I did a fundraising event. So as I promised. So I walked backwards from where she was diagnosed on Portland to where she was treated in Southampton Hospital in Hampshire, which was 76 miles. But I did the whole thing walking backwards. So literally every single step was backwards. And I had a mate of mine who I used to serve with called Mick Cowles. And Mick was standing behind me and directly left and right. We asked, so it was. We did it in stages. Like we did. You were doing like 15 miles a day. The longest one was from Bournemouth Hospital to a place called Lyndhurst, which was like 21 miles where we did. But every single step was backwards.
And walking backwards is a lot more. Like it's not just about your view, is it? It's a lot more tiring on your legs.
Yeah,
and, there's a reason there's a reason we walk forwards. Our legs are built to go that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, it's weird because I've got the ankle injury as well.
Right.
So my ankle, as soon as I start walking, would swell up, and then I'd stop it. It started to go down, then it swell up again. So again, I was taking copious amounts of bloody bruising, codeine, paracetamol, just to have it. I only fell over once. And literally, that was right. We got to Southampton Hospital. The TV cameras were there waiting for us to arrive. And we walked up to them. They said, "Brilliant. Can you do that last bit again?" I went, "Yeah, of course." Oh, no. And I thought, but yes, we raised awareness for we made. I think it was about £10,400 for scoliosis awareness. But mate, it's just you don't realise how many people have scoliosis. Statistics say that 4 in every 1,000 children in the UK have scoliosis. I think they need to look at our statistics again because we saw so many different people and so many different people were saying to us, my child's got scoliosis or my family members got scoliosis. It was shocking. So yeah, so I'm doing that. I'm still raising money for them. I've, as you know, I've published a book called Soldier of Conscience, which talks about really what we talked about. So from being at school, getting the cane, my early parts of the military, my time in a paramedic, working in Africa and Iraq, my other fundraising events. Like I said, I also spent a week surviving on a life raft on the English Sea. Okay, mate, that was mad. That was probably the hardest thing I've done. But and then I think, but all the royalties from the sale of the book is going to scoliosis support and research.
Great, man. Well, I just want to ask one thing on this scoliosis, mate, because it sounds like I don't have kids, but I'm assuming when you have kids, there's a period at the beginning where, you're bathing them and everything like that. Then they start to get a bit more independence, kind of like you were saying. So is it like a kind of a bit of a bad coincidence of the way scoliosis works is that it tends, you start to notice the signs after that stage where you're that hands-on with the kids. And so that's why it's not kind of recognized until quite often it needs surgery.
it's called idiopathic scoliosis because they don't know why it happens, but it usually happens in their teenage years.
Right.
Predominantly happens to females, but it can happen to males, but predominantly females. So that's why I want to try and raise as much money as I can to try and stop parents from going through what we went through. It's heartbreaking. You don't want to see your child, to go through this. I mean, at the early stage, I think so. There's three different what they call abnormalities or degrees. Sorry, not abnormalities. Three different degrees. So I think it's 0 to 15 degrees, and what they can do is they can put it into their monitor. 15 to 30 degrees, they'll put them in a brace. So they make this body brace, and the body then tries to adjust and says that. And then from 45 degrees upwards, really all you're looking at is surgery. So when we got diagnosed with Freya, she was 74 degrees. So the only thing left was surgery. I mean, some Usain Bolt's got scoliosis, which I didn't know about. Princess Eugenie, she's got scoliosis, and she's really, so when she got married, she had this open back dress which showed her scar. I mean, Freya's scar is amazing. Yeah, it's the whole length of her spine. She still gets a bit of pain with her every now and then, but she's a lot better than what she was. But yeah, so I'm trying to raise as much as I can and as much awareness of scoliosis to try and stop it from happening, because they don't know why it happens.
That's incredible, mate. Well, mate, thanks so much for your all this. One, for your time today, and for all this work you've been doing and continue to do. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to people before we wrap up?
Yeah, just one more thing. Listen, mate, thanks very much. I really appreciate everything that you're doing to try and push this order. Your podcasts are brilliant, so please watch and keep watching them. But people can buy the book from Amazon. It's or Pen and Sword. It's literally it's just been reprinted because it's already sold all of the copies. And do you know, I'm getting messages from people saying thank you for admitting to mental health. It's helped them. So yeah, so not only is it helping with the scoliosis because all the royalties are going to go there, but it's also helping for it. If people want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Ingram M.B.E. And then please, if you send me a message, I will get back to you. I promise you. Go, honestly, mate, thank you very much. I really appreciate everything you've done.
All right, guys, there we have it. Wayne, thanks so much for giving up your time, mate. Really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for all the great work that you were doing out there. And guys, I'm sure you want to go and support Wayne now, so you can find everything linked up down in the show notes. Wayne's social media, Wayne's book, Wayne's website. It's all linked up down there in the show notes. So please go and check that out now that we have wrapped up for the day. And of course, one thing that we do ask of you, if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. If you could share it on social media, that's great. But if you could just send a text, send a link to the podcast to the mate, give it a little recommendation, we'd really appreciate that. We'll be back next week with another episode, guys. Until then, be good to yourselves, be kind to each other, and we'll catch you again very soon.